What would you do if every shadow on your way home could hide a monster? If every dark corner was not just an empty space, but an ambush waiting to happen? Imagine it is late. The road is long. And what if the sound of footsteps behind you in the fog was not just your imagination, but the last thing you would ever hear before a muffled whisper and the cold glint of a blade under the weak, flickering light of a gas lamp? Take a deep breath. Imagine the air. It is a poison. The acrid smell of coal, smoke that clings to your throat, mixed with the putrid stench of the River Thames, a liquid cemetery flowing through the city. From the taverns escapes the cheap, sweet aroma of gin, the only solace for the damned. Feel the dampness. It is the fog, a living, sticky creature that clings to your clothes, your skin, your lungs. It is a shroud that smothers sound and blinds the eye, turning the world into a labyrinth of ghosts and whispers. Listen carefully. Hear the incessant, hollow cough of the sick in overcrowded doorways, an orchestra of tuberculosis. Hear the rattle of carriage wheels on cobblestones, slick with grime and rain. And then, the silence. A sudden, unnatural silence that falls when you turn a dark corner and realize you are utterly alone. This is not a gothic horror story. For the women of the Whitechapel district, in the terrifying autumn of 1888, this was the daily pulse of fear. What you are about to hear is not the story of a murderer. It is the autopsy of a city, a journey into the heart of Victorian darkness, where the true monstrosity hid not just behind one face, but in the streets themselves, in the indifference and the hopelessness of an entire era. To understand the ghost, we must first explore the haunted house it inhabited. Victorian London was a two-faced beast, a marvel and a monster. On one hand, it was the capital of the world, the beating heart of the greatest empire history had ever known, a center of unimaginable wealth, dizzying industrial progress and power that stretched across every continent. Its West End streets were lit by gas, its theaters overflowed with elegant people, its parks were oases of order, and its mansions, fortresses of opulence. But if you crossed the city to the east, you entered another reality, its other face. The East End, and at its heart, the district of Whitechapel, was not just a poor neighborhood. It was a ghetto of abject misery, the sewer where the empire hid its forgotten. Whitechapel was a labyrinth designed for despair. Its streets were narrow, twisted, often dead ends, creating perfect traps in the darkness. Inner courtyards, known as courts, became pits of darkness and silence, invisible from the main streets. It was an overcrowded enclave of immigrants, Irish fleeing the famine and Jews escaping the pogroms of Eastern Europe, which fueled constant racism and social tension. Overcrowding was a plague. Entire families of 6, 8, 10 people lived, ate, and slept in a single, unventilated room in decrepit, rotting buildings known as rookeries. The total lack of basic sanitation meant that sewers ran in the open. The water was contaminated. Diseases like cholera, smallpox, and tuberculosis were the norm, not the exception. In this hell, life was governed by the most brutal and immediate necessity. For women on the lowest rung of the social ladder, without family, without work, without a safety net, prostitution was not a moral choice. It was a matter of survival. They were known euphemistically as the unfortunate, and their only goal each day was to earn the 4 pence needed to pay for a bed in a lodging house, a doss house, for a single night. To earn that money, they had to seek clients on the streets, in doorways, in the darkest alleys. They were the city's most vulnerable inhabitants, forced to walk directly into the darkness. And the fog, the famous London pea souper, a thick soup of water vapor and industrial pollution, was the perfect accomplice. It offered impenetrable cover for a predator who moved in silence, a ghost who hunted other ghosts. The terror did not begin with a roar, but with a grim discovery on an August morning. At first, in a city accustomed to violent death, it seemed like just another tragedy in the long, anonymous history of the poor. Imagine the scene. It is 3:40 in the morning on August 31st. Bucks Row is shrouded in gloom. Charles Cross, a carter, is on his way to work. The gray light of dawn is just beginning to tinge the sky. He sees a figure on the ground next to a doorway. He thinks it's a drunk or sleeping woman, an all too common sight in Whitechapel. He approaches, along with another man passing by. He touches her shoulder to wake her. She doesn't move. They lean in, and then horror paralyzes them. In the dim light, they see a dark stain spreading from her neck. Her throat has been cut so savagely that her head is almost severed. What shocked the police and the doctor who arrived on the scene was not the murder itself. Life was cheap in Whitechapel. It was the mutilation. The woman's abdomen had been sliced open with a series of precise and brutal cuts. This was not the result of a brawl, nor the work of a thief. This was something new, methodical, unknown, terrifying. Yet panic had not yet gripped the city. The press reported it, but it was just another murder in Whitechapel. One more crime in the slums. But the victim was not just a headline. Her name was Mary Ann Nichols, Polly, to the few who knew her. She was 43 and a mother of 5. A life of hardship, a broken marriage, and alcoholism had stripped her of everything, pushing her onto the streets. Her story, tragically, was not exceptional. It was the fate of thousands of women forgotten by Victorian society. Her death was the first letter in a story that would be written in blood. To understand the desperation that drove Polly Nichols and the other women to risk their lives for 4 pence, you must enter a doss house. Imagine opening the door. The first thing that hits you is the smell. A dense, nauseating miasma of unwashed sweat, damp clothes, coal smoke, cheap food, and sickness. The air is thick, hard to breathe. The communal kitchen is a hell in miniature. Dozens of people crowd around a single fire, cooking what little they have. A herring, a piece of bread. Arguments and fights are constant. The dormitories are row upon row of iron beds, so close together you can barely walk between them. You share the space with strangers, drunks, thieves, the sick. There is no privacy, no security. The sound is a cacophony of snores, coughs, and muffled cries. And for the most desperate, those who couldn't even scrape together the 4 pence for a bed, there was the penny hang. You paid 1 penny. In return, you didn't get a bed, but the right to sleep sitting on a wooden bench, leaning against a rope stretched the length of the room. In the morning, the keeper didn't wake you gently. He simply let the rope go, and everyone woke up as they fell to the filthy floor. This was the alternative to freezing to death on the street. This was home. This was what Polly Nichols and the other women risked their lives for every night. The difference between this hell and the freezing hell of an alley was just 4 pence. In the early hours of September 30th, the killer escalated his game of terror to a level of inconceivable audacity. He killed 2 women in the same night, and, in the process, gave himself a name that would go down in history, transforming local fear into national hysteria. Imagine the chaos of that night. The London police, already on high alert, patrolled the streets. At 1 a.m, in a dark courtyard called Dutfield's Yard, a vendor discovers the body of Elizabeth Stride. Her throat has been cut, but she has not been mutilated. The police theory is that the killer was interrupted in his macabre task, while officers cordon off the scene, creating a perimeter. Questioning neighbors, just a few minutes walk away, the killer is already with his next victim. He is murdering and horrifically mutilating Catherine Eddowes in Mitre Square, a dark and lonely place. The audacity is incredible. It's as if the killer is mocking the authorities, moving among them like an invisible ghost. It is at this moment that the media enters a frenzy. Letters, supposedly written by the killer, begin to arrive at news agencies. Most are cruel hoaxes from a morbid public. But one of them, received by the Central News Agency a few days earlier, is written in red ink with a taunting, arrogant tone. It promises to keep cutting up women and to send the ears to the police. It is signed with a name that will be seared into the public consciousness: Jack the Ripper. The anonymous monster now had a name, a catchy, theatrical, terrifying name. The legend was born. The city panics. Citizens form vigilance committees and patrol the streets with clubs and lanterns, seeing a suspect in every shadow. Women lock themselves in their homes. Distrust falls on everyone. Butchers and slaughtermen for their skill with a knife. Doctors and surgeons for their supposed anatomical knowledge. And above all, Jewish immigrants who become scapegoats for a fear bordering on paranoia. Fear becomes the only topic of conversation in every pub, every market, every home. The hunt for the world's most famous murderer was not a thrilling Sherlock Holmes-style chase. It was a frustrating, slow, and desperate struggle against darkness, misinformation, and the limitations of a pre-scientific era. Follow the steps of Inspector Frederick Aberline, the Scotland Yard detective in charge of the case. Feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. Imagine his office, the walls covered with maps of Whitechapel, reports piling up on his desk, each one a dead end. Walk with him on his nightly rounds. Feel the chill of the fog in his bones. Hear the lonely echo of his own. Footsteps in the silent, empty alleys. Imagine the strain of interrogating terrified witnesses who don't trust the police. Their accounts are confused, contradictory, distorted by darkness, cheap gin, and pure fear. The investigation faced insurmountable obstacles. Forensic science was in its infancy. The idea of using fingerprints as evidence was a novelty not yet applied. There were no blood tests, no DNA, no modern criminal profiling. The police had to interview more than 2,000 people and investigate hundreds of suspects, from local doctors to known criminals. The very geography of Whitechapel was the killer's best ally. Its population was transient, a sea of anonymous faces. Its labyrinth of courts and alleys was a perfect hiding place. It was like trying to catch smoke with your hands. The pressure on the police was immense. They were ridiculed in the press as incompetent, drawn in cartoons as fools chasing ghosts. Queen Victoria herself expressed her displeasure. And every night, they lived with the constant stress of knowing the killer could strike again, and they were powerless to stop him. In this atmosphere of fear, the popular press did not just report. It became a central character in the story, often for the worse. Cheap newspapers like the Illustrated Police News did not sell news. They sold pure sensationalism. Instead of photographs, they published wood engravings, grotesque and explicit illustrations of the crimes. They depicted the victims in their final moments, with the killer lurking behind them, feeding the public's morbid imagination. On one hand, this coverage kept the pressure on the authorities and alerted the public to the danger. But on the other, it fueled hysteria, spread rumors and false leads, and was instrumental in creating the Jack the Ripper myth. They transformed a sordid, anonymous killer of poor women into a macabre celebrity, an almost supernatural theatrical villain. Meanwhile, the more respectable West End, newspapers like The Times, treated the story with a cold, analytical distance. For their wealthy readers, it was not a terror lurking on their streets, but a deplorable social problem happening in that other world, the East End. One more proof of the profound social indifference that had created the perfect breeding ground for the killer to hunt with impunity. In the final act of his butchery, the Ripper committed his most savage crime. Not in a dark alley, but in the apparent safety of a room. He left behind a scene of such absolute horror that it marked the climax and the mysterious end of his reign of terror. It is the morning of November 9th, 1888. The victim is Mary Jane Kelly. At only 25, she was the youngest of them all, and the only one not killed on the street, but in her own room in Miller's Court. Imagine the scene, the morning silence. Mary's room is locked from the inside. The landlord's assistant, a man named Thomas Bowyer, has been sent to collect the rent she owes. He knocks. No answer. Worried, he goes to the window, where a pane of glass is broken, and pushes aside the curtain to look inside. What he sees leaves him paralyzed. What he sees is indescribable. It is not the body of a woman. It is a slaughterhouse. A horror that defies words. The room does not look like a home, but an abattoir. The man stumbles back, pale, babbling. It's as if the devil himself has been here. This murder was different. The brutality, the savagery, and above all, the time the killer spent in the room, unleashing his fury uninterrupted, suggest a final escalation, an uncontrolled explosion of violence. And then, after this macabre masterpiece, the murders stopped. The silence that followed was almost as terrifying as the crimes themselves. The ghost of Whitechapel, the terror of London, simply vanished into the same fog from which he had emerged. The question hung forever in the London air. Why did he stop? Was he arrested for another crime? Did he die in an accident? Or from illness? Did he flee the country? Or did he simply decide with terrifying calm that his work was done? Imagine winter arriving in Whitechapel. The fog is still thick, the streets are still dark, but the screams in the newspaper headlines have subsided. A woman returning to her lodging house quickens her pace, pulling her shawl tighter. The killer may be gone, but he has left something worse, his ghost. He has become part of the city, a whisper in every dark alley, the proof that the thin veneer of Victorian civilization was just a mask over an abyss of darkness. The true identity of Jack the Ripper was never discovered, and perhaps in the end it doesn't matter. Because Jack was not just a man, he was a specter created by London itself. He was the personification of society's indifference to the poor, a monster who hunted in the shadows that the age of progress and industry refused to illuminate. He was not just the murderer of 5 women, he was the accuser of an entire era. What do you think is the most terrifying aspect of this story? The mystery of a killer who was never caught, or the reality of a society that allowed the perfect conditions to exist for a monster like him to hunt with impunity? Leave your opinion in the comments. If this journey into the darkness of history has gripped you, subscribe to Chronicles of History. Here, we don't just tell history, we relive it.